today's event. My name is Ed Edick. I am the chair of the board of directors of the Economic Forecast Project. I am very, so. That's me. I'm very pleased to serve with a tremendous group of local business leaders that have put a lot of effort into our community above and beyond the Economic Forecast Project. And I'd like them all to stand and be recognized for their good work. Board, please stand. If you're on the board, please stand. So you've already seen something different this year. We're here in the afternoon instead of 8 o'clock in the morning. Why is that? Because I'm the chair and I thought it would be fun. So we're doing something different. So instead of quiche and coffee, yeah, let's hear it, yeah. Instead of quiche and coffee in the morning, we're having hors d'oeuvres and refreshments after the event. So stick around, it's going to be fun. And so what was the other benefit of this? I wrote this down. 2 benefits. You didn't have to get up early to be here, but you got to leave the office an hour early. So hey, a win-win. So as much as the board of directors does for us, we would not be able to do this without the sponsors. They keep supporting us, and it's just amazing. You've seen all the names up on the screen while you've been here. And while all of them are important, I especially want to recognize several that go above and beyond in supporting what we do here. First off, the Gretler Foundation, continually supporting us, wonderful, wonderful people. No, hold your applause, thank you. Our gold sponsors this year are American Riviera Bank, UCLA Health, 817 State on the Paseo, and the Deckers brand. Our platinum sponsor again this year is Montecito Bank and Trust, and our founding sponsor since the beginning, U.S. Bank Private Wealth Management. And before we get started, UCSB Chancellor Henry Yang would like to say a few words. So thank you very much. Henry?
Good afternoon, and welcome to our 2024 South County Economic Summit, hosted by the Economic Forecast Project of UC Santa Barbara. Since 1981, the project has provided our community with information on economic, demographic, and regional business trends. This yearly summit helped inform the vision and the decisions of our local educators, elected officials, and business leaders. Thank you to our South County Board of Directors for the project. We appreciate your leadership and the support. Thank you to our sponsors. We are grateful for the support and the resources you have dedicated to make this project such a success over the past 4 decades. I would also like to express my appreciation to our Executive Director of the project, Professor Peter Rupert. Yeah. Okay. And a thank you to our guest speakers, Chair of EFP South County Board of Directors, Ed Edick. Yeah. And a thanks to Principal Radius Commercial Real Estate, Jean Deering. And a thank you to Founder and Executive Chairman Caruso, Dick Caruso. This summit is in part a reflection of our campus's reputation as a center of innovation and entrepreneurship, and our commitment to promote economic growth for our community, our state, and our nation. Forbes has listed the UC Santa Barbara among topmost entrepreneurial universities. We average 90 to 100 invention disclosures annually, nearly half under licensing agreements. Our university is fortunate to be part of such a dynamic community. So together with our community, we are advancing innovation and creating new companies and new jobs. So I wanted to thank each and every one of you for your vision, support, and commitment. Thank you for attending this wonderful event today.
So, welcome. So, no, it's a great event. It's really great to have Rick Caruso coming. I'll talk a little bit more about Rick when he's going to come out. But first, we're going to have Gene Deering talking about, I don't know, running with the bulls. I don't know where that came from. But Gene Deering, Radius Group.
Thank you, sir. All right, thank you guys again for coming. It's been a couple years since I was up here last. Last time, everyone in the crowd was wearing masks. I didn't see any smiles. It was kind of an eerie experience when you're up here. And now I see the smiles, I see all the people, and it's a good thing. Now, there are some things that I miss from those days. That's back when there was some of that cheap debt and construction, a lot cheaper to do. So some things have changed, and I'll get into how those are impacting downtown and a couple of thoughts on how we can move things forward. So first, I want to start looking way back at State Street. So this is in the 1890s, I'm told. The building on the left, right there, is now what is Old Navy, and that's the San Marcos building. But I want you to look at the street. So you've got horse and buggies, you've got the trolley line, it's sort of a dirt road, there might be chickens running across it. You know, when you think it's scary to cross State Street with some e-bikes, things were a lot different back then. So now let's go forward a little bit. Now we're in right around the 20s, and you can see there's parking on State. You still have the trolley lines, and there's a guy standing right on the middle of State Street. And if I'm not mistaken, I think it's Pete Giordano. Pete, was that you? So you see that State has gone through some changes. Now we go, this is probably in the 40s. You're looking at Haley and State Street. Again, you've got parking on both sides. You've got quite a few lanes for traffic going both directions. We'll go a little further forward. Now we're looking at 330 State Street. Basically, that's the 101 where the underpass is now. You've got two-way traffic going both directions. So State Street, how it looks, has evolved. And so has our retail climate. You know, downtown was kind of on top for a while. La Cumbre Plaza was built. That stole a bunch of the attention and traffic. La Cumbre Plaza had its day, and then Paseo Nuevo was built. Paseo Nuevo was sort of the place to be that had its day. It's past. You know, now would you say the Funk Zone and Montecito have taken some of that energy, and it's kind of the process with retail. There's ups and downs, and I'm hopeful that we can get, you know, State Street and downtown back on track. And when State Street was in its heyday, it was because of the support of the locals. Locals going to dinner, going out on State Street, and I'm guessing people in this room might not be doing that as much as they did 20 years ago. And how do we get locals back to State Street? That's part of the way we're going to solve this. So, like anyone, you know, we've got this AI technology. How can we use it in different ways? And I had to have a title for this speech, and as Peter mentioned, you know, State Street running of the bulls. Okay, well, how do we do that? Well, we've got our Spanish heritage in Santa Barbara, and now that State Street's closed, maybe that's a gimmick. Maybe we could run some bulls on State Street. We could do that. So I went to ChatGPT, type in, you know, show me a bull running on State Street in Santa Barbara. 8 seconds later, it produces this image, and you know, then I'm like, okay, State Street running of the bulls. Well, who's my favorite bull? And I'm like, okay, well, that's got to be Michael Jordan. But then I realize you can't use Michael's face because it's ChatGPT. They don't have rights to him. So I said, all right, let's just stick with the running of the bulls. So as a backdrop, as we tour around State Street, we have a budget deficit. So we have at least a $7 million deficit in 2025, and that comes into play as we try to redesign State Street. You know, are we going to have the money to do some of these grand ideas that are talked about? So from there, want to get up in the drone, flying out over State Street. And a lot of towns are struggling with their downtown, and they don't have what we have. I mean, you just look at this place. It's ridiculous. The ocean, the weather, we have so much going for us that I know we can get downtown back to being the cool place to be. And now we're flying over the 400 block estate, and what's the most exciting project downtown in my mind right now are the 78 apartment units that are being built right there behind Staples. This is 78 units. This is kind of the largest scale apartments we've seen in downtown, and I think it's going to do a lot for the 400 block and for downtown, because 78 units might mean 300 people living downtown. So this should be finished right around the spring, and you're going to get a bunch of new housing stock released into the market. And that developer is going to have to set rents where they're going to fill, and if it's slow, he's going to lower rents, and that's part of the process when you increase supply. Here's a look of what it will look like when it's done. So that, to me, is a step in getting locals back to downtown. So now let's sort of turn around from there, and we'll look at the underpass. If you've driven down State Street recently, you've seen it's under construction. I think this is a cool project. It's going to connect the waterfront to downtown, but it comes with a cost. So it was $11 million to make that experience going from the waterfront to downtown. And when people talk about closing State Street and redoing all 9 blocks, and, you know, we don't hear what that's going to cost very often. It could be a $200 million endeavor. So now that our city is struggling for funds, we have to keep that in mind when these big ideas are thrown out. So now let's look at the 400 block. So this is a Staples building right in front of those 78 units. It's 17,000 square feet. It's been available for a while. I think the 400 block is pretty interesting because it's never been closed to traffic, and opening to traffic isn't going to solve our issues. Back in 2019, before the pandemic, we still had a lot of vacancy. I do think we need to open up some more of the blocks until we have a real idea of what we're doing. But the 400 block is a good example of a streetscape that hasn't changed. Then you've got the 99-cent store. Probably heard they're going through bankruptcy, so you're probably going to see a change with that building. That's another 17,000 square feet on the same block. What's different about that building, you've got this large parking lot off Gutierrez, and as I talk about a return to locals on State, I would love to see some type of small grocer there and have something for the 78 units and others to shop and get food downtown as we try to keep those people living downtown with services downtown. Other deal on the 400 block I want to mention is 27,000 square foot tech office sublease, Umbra Labs from Invoca. A 27,000 square foot tech office deal in this market is very rare, and that's a great thing for the 400 block because that's a big space and they're going to have people working there. Adaptive reuse. This is basically taking a building, converting it to something we need. My favorite of those completed projects is the Drift Hotel. So this was the old Church of Scientology building. It was bad retail office that was run down, and the developer came in, got rid of that bad supply, built hotels through most of the building, and then some very small retail in the front. Now that our city needs money, the best way to get that money is TOT tax. So I think you're going to see us starting to embrace some of these hotels because they will help fill that gap. Here you can see the small retail. This is a coffee shop and a restaurant, maybe 500-600 feet. And that's what retailers want these days. They want small space, and they'll pay a really high rate. The spaces that are tough to fill are the 2,500 to 5,000 square foot tenants. There just isn't demand for that. Another adaptive reuse building, really cool looking building. This is Chapala and Canon Perdido. Frontier owns this building. They were able to condominiumize the building and sell off most of it to a developer. That group bought the building, and they're going to convert the building into mini storage. And yeah, okay, unique use, yes, but it's reducing the supply of office, and it's going to fill up that space. Also, this building has some pretty large parking lots surrounding it, and this developer plans to build housing on those parking lots. So we're going to get more people living downtown. We got rid of some bad office product, and this adaptive reuse is always a win. Whatever we can do as a city to embrace this adaptive reuse process, we need to, because it's a great way to revitalize some of our older buildings. So now let's look at the 900 block estate. This block has had the most difficulty. It's got 8 vacancies right now, the most of any block in downtown. You know, Forever 21, they left quite a long time ago. There's a plan to do a hotel there, and there's just one restaurant on this block. And this, to me, is a block that needs to be reopened. If you walk this block Saturday at 2 o'clock, do you know what you hear? You hear nothing. It is dead silent, and it's a little eerie. So in my mind, this is one of those blocks. Let's do one-way traffic going up the street with diagonal parking. Now, this block has one of the best retailers in the world, an Apple, on it, and it hasn't been enough to buoy others. Then you've got the theater that's also going through bankruptcy, so hopefully we see some new excitement for that block. Now we go one block down to the 800 block. Very similar story to the 900 block in that there's not a lot of restaurants. It's pretty sleepy, it's pretty quiet, and if we don't know what we're going to do with these blocks in terms of closing them or changing the hardscape, again, I think this may be another one we reopen to car traffic of some way, and maybe that includes some parking. Okay, so now let's look at the 500 block. This is the block with all the restaurants and the one that's probably done the best being closed. There's parklets everywhere. You walk down this block, there's some energy and some excitement. I know that a lot of people talk about how do we get the Fiesta Parade back to State Street, and I feel like if we can successfully transplant someone's heart, we can figure out a way to move 20 parklets for 6 hours. I struggle with that being the reason that we can't have the Fiesta Parade on State Street. So one of the many things we need to look at. And now the most important piece. This is the former Macy's. So we'll get back in the drone, and this is kind of one of those moments in time that if we handle it correctly, we can have a great result. So now we're flying over De La Guerra Plaza, and you get a look at the Macy's building. And it's a dinosaur. This isn't a building that can easily be repurposed. Lack of window line, layout. This is a building that needs to become apartments. And we as a city and a community, we need to find a way to help that developer really make the project move forward. And this developer is in a good position. Alliance Bernstein, the lender, took over the project. Georgetown Group is their preferred developer. And if we don't help them, nothing's going to happen. And we're going to have the petting zoo, laser tag, the flea markets in there that are just filling the space, and it's going to drag downtown down for what may be 40 years as the land lease runs its course. So this is one to focus on, and this is a win that we need. Now, as we travel up Chapala, the next big building is the Nordstrom building. Now, the makeup and configuration of this building does lend itself a little bit better to adaptive reuse, but it still would be difficult. That's another building. If that developer comes to the city with a creative idea to repurpose, redo, we need to embrace them and try to figure out how we can get them to move that forward, because those two pieces can make such a big difference in downtown. So let's go back to our slides, where we left with a budget deficit. I saw, okay, well, we have this budget deficit. Let's raise parking rates in downtown. And I'm hearing that, and we're trying to save downtown. I know that will give us some short-term money, but seems like a challenge. Looking at all the different blocks, you can see all the vacancies. Our vacancies basically remained about flat since 2019. Thank you to Justin Diem, who monitors all this closely. Looking at individual storefronts. So basically from the freeway to Sola, there's 249 storefronts. We have a vacancy rate of about 15%. We do have 10 pop-ups. That makes it feel like less, so it feels like 9%, but I know we can do better, and I know that bringing locals downtown will help us. Okay, so now I need everyone in here to put your developer hat on, because we need developers to move forward with some projects. So put your hat on, think like a developer. I was talking with Austin Hurley and Chris Parker about, how do we show what a developer's facing, and I love a spreadsheet. And so I figured we'd break down some numbers. So here's the prime rate, and you can see where it was in 2020 and 2021. Rock bottom, money was very cheap. Construction loans might be 150 basis points above that. So in 2020, 2021, you're paying 5% on your construction loan. It's beautiful, very cheap. Now you're probably close to 10%. That alone will kill a lot of projects in the pipeline. Then you look at construction materials. 2020, you can see the spike. After you're looking at that, then you're looking at cost of construction. Cost of construction in 2021 and 2022 up 27 and then 13% back-to-back years. That alone would kill a lot of the projects that are in the pipeline. So one of the local developers opened his books to us and showed us he did 3 projects over the last 10 years. Hard and soft costs were $243 a foot in 2014. Very similar project done in 2023, $395 a foot. So that's a 63% increase, and if you bid this job today, it'd be well over $400 a foot. Then you look at entitlement time and plan check time, basically an 8-month increase in that process. So again, now remember, you're wearing your developer hat. So if you have a $20 million construction loan, you're paying 10% interest. That 8-month delay is $1.5 million, and that could be the difference between you deciding to do the project or leave things the way they sit. If you're wearing their developer hat, you have a personal guarantee on that $20 million. So if you're that developer, you are not going to move forward with a project unless you're absolutely sure you can make money, because you're risking all of your various assets. And without new projects, I feel like our downtown isn't going to get back to where it was with locals. So look at those headwinds: cost of financing, cost of construction, permitting timelines, also landlord restrictions related to rent and tenants. If a developer feels the goal line may be moving and doesn't have a sense for what may change, they like certainty, and they're not going to move forward with a project. So that's another scary thing for them. So back in 2021, the city engaged BAE Urban Economics to look at their affordability and how it relates to building housing. Now remember, this is 2021, money's cheap, construction's a little cheaper. They said it was basically not that feasible with 20% affordability. Fast forward to today, they're having BAE look at things again, and in this study, I'll save you the suspense, they're going to find out that even with no affordability, a lot of these projects don't pencil. So you can see all these projects in the pipeline, especially the ones that were proposed in 2020 and 2021. Those spreadsheets looked a lot different, and I don't know if a lot of those are actually going to be built. So then we look at Paseo Nuevo. Again, in my mind, one of the keys to downtown, and when they're talking about 30 to 40% affordable, that means the project's not going to happen. That's not the sort of assist that the developer needs to move things forward. Also, because there's moving pieces in downtown, just want to mention the CBID. That's the Downtown Association. That's going to a vote. Normally, I'm against this type of thing, but given the state of downtown and State Street, maybe it's worth a try. Maybe that'll have some more impact on dealing with some of the homeless issues. Okay, so I don't mean to sort of tread on someone's territory that may be following me in this speech. You take a look at a very simple supply and demand graph. Just give me a second. Let me see let's see.
So
if
now
this
you're doing
makes sense.
economics.
Well, business economics major from UCSB. Just bear with me here, okay? Okay, so supply 1, current stock of apartments. Supply 2, if we build more apartments, if we add more apartments, rents come down. And Adam Smith, the invisible hand, does that really work? Are you buying this?
Gene, sell real estate. It's not that simple. Wait a minute. It is that simple.
Okay,
Go ahead.
I'm glad you said that, because now let's round it out with the running of the bulls. So I didn't know if you were going to disagree with me. So the bull was going to be chasing you. So as I'm sitting at my computer typing in to ChatGPT, bald guy wearing all black running down State Street chased by a bull, I didn't mention Mr. Clean, but apparently that's who we got. So now that you agree with me, let's change it up. Okay, there you go. You're riding the bull, and it looks like you've been working out. So I guess with that, I'll turn things over to you. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for your support.
That was almost funny. Anyway, this is me, professor of economics at UCSB. It's a nice introduction by the chancellor. It's always great to have him here, facing some tough times, obviously. You can always get in contact with me. There's my email. Feel free. Below that is a great website. It's a little bit of a blog about the U.S. economy. It's like the best thing you'll ever read. It's mine. So what I'm going to do today, I'm going to talk a little bit about inflation. That's in the news right now. Talking about interest rates, Gene was talking about them and what that's going to mean for us moving forward. Whether or not we're entering a recession, I'll talk a little bit about that. Talk about the labor market. The debt has recently come back to people's thinking, so I'm going to talk about that. Then I'm going to get to Santa Barbara and talk about some kind of new data we have on Santa Barbara. Okay, so let's start with inflation. Inflation's ticked up over the last couple of months. It's much higher than the Fed's 2% target. By the way, why does the Fed have a 2% target? Got to target something, I guess. It's a long story, but it's not interesting. So they have a 2% target. So this is what the Fed kind of looks at. This is called, they don't look at the CPI too much. They tend to concentrate on the personal consumption expenditure price index. That's more encompassing than the CPI. So the graph you have here is basically the blue line. This one is the monthly CPI, monthly PCE, sorry. You don't want the Fed responding to that thing, right? In economics, we have a technical term for that kind of line. It's a wiggly line. It's too wiggly. It's really volatile. And that's why you'll see the Fed has different measures of what they try to do with inflation. They talk about the core measure, supercore, and that's because they want to get at the underlying trend. One way to do that is to look at this green line. This green line is the year-over-year inflation rate. The problem with that is it's not wiggly enough. It's going back a year and comparing inflation today to what it was a year ago. That's not a very useful measure either. The red line is something that my co-author and I on our blog created. It's a trend inflation where we use all of the months going back. We weight the current months more heavily than the previous month, etc. And what you can see here is there was a time when it was even below 2% not too long ago. The Fed was pretty happy. Inflation was down, the trend. The last few months, we've seen a kick up in inflation. That's really bad news for the Fed not to raise interest rates. But then they look at the core PCE. What's the core PCE? They get rid of food and energy. People always say, why do you get rid of food and energy? We eat food and use energy, so it's in our stuff we buy. Why are you getting rid of it? Well, the answer is we're trying to get rid of that wiggly line. That's the point. That's one way to do it. Get rid of the things that are super volatile. As you can see, that line has also gone up. In fact, it's about 3.6% today, going away from the 2% target. Okay, so not good. So why does it matter? Why does the Fed care that much? Well, first of all, if you just think, for example, about the cost of living index, if prices are growing faster than your wages are growing, that means your real incomes, your purchasing power is falling. The Fed does not like to be the people who are saying, we're going to make people poorer. That's not what they want to do. It's a very delicate balancing act for the Fed, as we've heard many, many times when they give these statements. They need to think about inflation. They need to think about whether or not the economy is going to go into a recession. That's their dual mandate, it's called. So this is why I believe that the Fed was started doing that. This is average hourly earnings. That's the blue line. This is how much people are making on average in the US. This is the year-over-year percentage change. Every time the blue line is above the red line, that means your purchasing power, your real incomes are going up. Every time the red line is above the blue line, the opposite, you're getting poorer. And what you can notice, and it's pretty interesting, is that coming out of the Great Recession, by the way, these gray bars here are recessions. Coming out of the Great Recession, you can see that wage growth was pretty low. It was right around 2%. That was wage growth. That's pretty low wage growth. However, what you can see for many, many years, the inflation rate was below that, which meant even though wage growth was slow, your real purchasing power was going up because inflation was less than that. Then you can see what started to happen during the pandemic here. What happened was basically that the Fed kept interest rates really low, inflation took off, got up to near 8%. Wage growth was actually growing very fast. It was growing at like 4%. What does that mean? It means you were losing 4% a year in your purchasing power. The Fed don't like that. They don't. That is exactly why the Fed decided to raise rates pretty much the fastest they ever have in the history of the Federal Reserve. And we all saw the effects of that. That's what this looks like. So here the red line is CPI inflation. The blue line is the federal funds rate. And you can see the correlation between them. It's pretty high. When inflation goes up, the Fed tends to raise the interest rate to try to get inflation to come back down. My dad had an 18% mortgage. Kind of crazy. He had an 18% mortgage. I'm not going to go into the reasons why this went up so much. We can talk about Richard Nixon later. We can talk about why it went down. We can talk about Paul Volcker later. And then what you can see what happened was that the inflation rate came down, and so did the Fed funds rate. We hit 2008, the Great Recession, and we all know what happened. The Fed lowered the interest rate to 0. Kind of, you haven't seen that before. This goes all the way back to the 1950s. We never saw the Fed having a 0 federal funds rate. That low rate, by the way, what we saw was inflation starting to go up. It went up, and then you can see when it went up very high, then this is exactly where the Fed started raising interest rates really fast. Okay, so that's what's happening. They see inflation going up. Do they care about the economy? Yes. They care about this a lot. So what's your point, you say? Don't expect rates to fall soon. At the beginning of the year, many people thought there might be 3 rate cuts this year. In the summer, ain't happening. That's my forecast. Maybe September, the market's starting to price that in. I will tell you now, if we see one more bad inflation report coming up, there's no way they're going to cut rates this year. You can bet on that. But then you say to me, but look, GDP has slowed down. And when GDP slows down, that means we're going in a recession, And so maybe the Fed wants to cut rates. So this is the Fed's kind of delicate balancing act. Indeed, GDP has fallen. It's fallen over the last two quarters. It went from a high rate of 4.9. By the way, that's a huge increase in GDP in a quarter. This is annualized. That's a huge increase, okay? Then it fell to 3.4, and this last measure was 1.6. So people are saying, yeah, the economy's slowing down a little bit. Are we going to enter a recession? Well, this graph is the probability of recession using data, and not data from any forecasters who don't know what's happening. This is real data. This is output, employment, productivity, a whole bunch of things that they put in a regression, and they try to forecast if we're in a recession today. Well, you can see, I mean, I like this model because every time we're in a recession, their model says we're in a recession. That's pretty good. It's 100% true we're in a recession. So, I kind of like that. Oh, let me blow this up a little bit. This is today. By the way, this number here is 0. According to the data, we're not even close to a recession. And you can see there have been times in the past when data looked kind of bad, but we didn't have a recession. Okay? So, are we in a recession right now? No. The economy is doing actually incredibly well. So you didn't believe my point the first time. Now I'll give you what the FOMC says in their last statement. The committee does not expect it will be appropriate to reduce the target range until it has gained greater confidence that inflation is moving sustainably toward 2%. That red line I drew, it was going the opposite way. It's going up, not down. If it goes up again, believe me, the bets are off for a rate cut this year. Labor market's doing amazing. We came back after the pandemic, and you can see we kind of got back on our trend line where employment had been growing. I want you to remember this graph because I'm going to show you the graph for Santa Barbara pretty soon about employment. It's going to look a little bit different. This is a big drop. This last month, employment growth was only 175,000. It hadn't been that low for many, many months. So again, people are saying, look, we're slowing down, aren't we? That's a pretty big drop. So is that a good sign that it's falling?
Economy. Now, that's less than what analysts had expected. The unemployment rate ticked up to 3.9%, extending the economy's streak to 27 straight months below 4%. Natalie Brand is at the White House with more on why the hiring slowdown is being seen as some good news by some this morning.
So the slowing down economy is being seen by some. That's what they said. What if we had zero employment growth? Wouldn't that even be better? Or negative? If this is good, let's slow it down a lot. It's bullshit.
Good morning, Natalie.
Good morning, Dana. Economists say these new numbers do show signs the job market is cooling down. The president, meanwhile, argues his economic plan is working, but also acknowledges there's more to do, as many voters say they're not feeling improvement.
U.S. stocks surged Friday despite a jobs report that revealed a slowdown in hiring, with 175,000 jobs added in April, fewer than economists had expected.
The cooling of the labor market is exactly what the Federal Reserve wants. Here's why. Because if there are fewer jobs created and there's less pressure to pay employees more money, that will mean that people will have less money to spend. They won't.
How is that good? People are going to have less money to spend. Don't watch the news. Or is it a bad sign?
The Munchkins call me because a new witch has just dropped a house on the Wicked Witch of the East. And there's the house, and here you are, and that's all that's left of the Wicked Witch of the East. And so what the Munchkins want to know is, are you a good witch or a bad witch?
But I've already told you, I'm not a witch at all. Witches are old and ugly.
So see, there's some evidence there that she was a witch because the house fell on the witch. She's not a witch at all. Is this a good sign or a bad sign? It's no sign at all. Why do I say that? This is kind of a stupid thing I did, but I did it anyway. So remember I told you that employment was only 175,000. So I said to myself, when it drops like that, and it's 175,000 or less, does it lead to a recession? That is, should we be worried we're going to a recession? So all these red dots are the times when employment growth was less than 175,000. And what you can see is there's a whole bunch of times when it's a lot less than 175,000, there's no recession, no recession, no recession. So this thing moves around. That's what it is. And this, as they said, this was less than economists had forecast. The month before, the 305,000 number was about 50% more than economists had forecast. So this is not an easy game, but in no way does it look like the labor market is not doing well. Here's a picture of the number of job openings in the U.S. economy versus the number of unemployed people. You can see what happened during the Great Recession. In the Great Recession, there was roughly 15 million unemployed people looking for jobs. There were about 3 million jobs. Each job had 5 people looking. Today, we have more jobs than unemployed persons. So this job market is really kind of tight. There's lots of vacancies out there, easy to get a job. The debt. People are starting to worry about the debt again. And maybe rightly so. What, me worry? Maybe not old enough for that one. Deficit and debt, CBO predicts, are likely to still be growing. The question is it a drag on our economic growth? That's the question. Should we care about the debt? So this is what the debt looks like. This goes back to 1939. And what you can see is right during World War II, we had a debt to GDP ratio of about 120%. We paid it off fast, high productivity, lots of savings, all kinds of stuff. We paid it off super fast. And by the way, we got down to debt of about 30% of GDP. Kind of astounding. Then what happened? We get some recessions. We start to go back a little bit. We hit the Great Recession. The government piled up lots and lots of debt, buying all kinds of things, bailing things out, bailing people out. Kept going up. Then what we saw during the pandemic happened again, and now we're at the highest level of debt we've seen since the 1930s. Okay? Kind of astounding. That in and of itself, maybe not a problem. By the way, that's a scary number I just gave you. That's because I wanted to scare you. The red line is what you should be looking at. This is the debt held by the public. The government holds a lot of its own debt. We don't really care about that. What we care about is the debt that we have to pay back to people. That's this red line. And again, it's still very high. So this is interest payments on the federal debt. The vertical axis has a percent of, as a percent of GDP of our interest payments. And what you can see is it's been rising a lot. By the way, still not close to where we were back in the 80s and early 90s. And why not? Well, interest rates were really high back then. I showed you that picture. Interest rates were really high. So paying that on the debt, you're paying a lot. Down here, remember, interest rates were incredibly low, almost zero. So even though the stock of debt was whatever it was, the interest rate was low. Now, we've seen the interest rates rise, and the fraction of debt goes up as well. This now is a graph of total expenditures, the percent by category of our total expenditures that the government does. The red line, defense budget. So you can see back in the 1940s, 80% of all the expenditures were on the defense budget. That fell. And now what you can see here is the interest payments on the debt are the same as the defense budget. Kind of shocking when you think about it. This green line, by the way, is Social Security. I tried to put expenditures on education on here, but it's like this. So I didn't put it. So now I want to turn to some stuff locally. I call it Santa Barbara stuff. So this is employment. This is total employment, Santa Barbara County. Remember the graph I showed you for the US? After the pandemic, we kind of got back on the trend line. We're still pretty far below the trend line for employment, right? So we're not growing as fast as the US economy grew in general. The labor force really started to pick up right before the pandemic. As you can see, labor force was picking up. Hit the pandemic, obviously falls a lot. We've come back a little bit, but it's not up to where it was right before the pandemic. Okay, so the labor force is also slow in coming back to where we were. This is two groups. The blue line is retail employment. The red line is leisure and hospitality. Gene was talking earlier about what's going on State Street and places like that. Well, what you can see is it wasn't because of the pandemic. It wasn't because of the Great Recession necessarily. Our retail employment has been falling since about 2003. In fact, we're about 10% lower today than we were back in 2002 in terms of retail employment. We want to get retail back. We're going to have to get people downtown. I'll get to that in a second. This is leisure and hospitality. Obviously, you know what happened during the pandemic. Everybody lost their job. And now it's almost back to where it was pre-pandemic. But again, not back to where it was had it been growing at that rate. It's an interesting picture, by the way, to compare this graph with Ventura. What's the difference? The difference is, here's our retail. Retail never fell after 2003 like it did in Santa Barbara. Here's Santa Barbara again. Something was happening in Santa Barbara versus Ventura. I don't know. Maybe somebody out there knows. We can talk later. Interestingly, SLO looks about the same as Santa Barbara. So whatever Ventura was doing, whatever they were doing, was pretty good in terms of retail employment, what they're doing. Although I always hear people going to SLO, and they say it's fantastic, right? The streets are full, hardly any vacancies, so more work to be done there. So this is some new data. This is on job postings. This is what's going on in Santa Barbara today. The number of job postings by employers has fallen lately, and demand is really the highest, kind of by far, in the healthcare sector. So these are unique postings, job postings by all these job boards that are out there. This is scraped, LinkedIn, all kinds of places. And what you can see is it peaked in 2022, and since the number of job postings, these are unique job postings by firms, has been falling. Who are the top companies posting jobs? UCSB, number one. But then look, health, 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 health. The healthcare industry is posting the most jobs right now. That's where all the jobs are being listed. Leisure, hospitality, Marriott, and Raytheon. Those are where the most of the jobs are being posted. Top occupations being posted? Well, registered nurses. That's the number one posting right now out there by the healthcare. Retail salespersons is next. Secretaries, customer service representatives, first-line supervisors, retail sales, home health, waiters and waitresses, security guards, fast food counter workers. What's interesting, almost all those jobs are pretty low paying. It's going to turn out, by the way, in the world, that most jobs are low-paying jobs. Why is that? There's many, many low-paid individuals for one CEO, right? So most of the job postings are for lower-wage individuals. This is my favorite one. Top posted job titles, bar back. It's good to see you guys drinking a lot. So we need more bar backs to help the bartenders out there. I like to see that. But again, administrative assistants, retail sales, sales associates, here's registered nurses, they pay a lot, relatively a lot. Medical assistants, caregivers, customer service, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, so that's what the postings look like. Housing. Ed was up here, he had his chance to talk about housing, he didn't. It costs a lot to live in Santa Barbara. Anybody know that? Sales to date, 14% higher than last year. 193 single family, 81 are condos. Average sales price for single family was $3.4 million. Median home price for condos was 1.7. And Montecito was average sales price was 7.2. Do you remember the song Alice's Restaurant? So the first half of the song, he's talking about dumping the garbage and then having to go pick it up, and he goes to jail and does all that stuff. Spends half the time doing that, and then he says, but that's not what I came to sing about. I came to tell you about the draft. I didn't come to talk to you about this other stuff. I came to talk about some economics. I'm going to call this the economics behind saving State Street and any street. I'm going to give you two simple things to know. Two. That's all. You know these two things, you understand them, you got it made. Here they are. Basic supply and demand. Gene put it up. Even Gene can understand it. He's a realtor. Commercial, though. And the second one is understanding incentives. You understand those two things, it's going to take us a long way to figuring out what the right policies are for Santa Barbara, or again, for any street. This graph. Some of you took it in school. You didn't forget it because everybody talks about supply and demand. You got to remember what it means, okay? It's just not two lines cross. This demand curve is the demand for that product, whether it's a good or labor, whatever, compared to as a function of the price. Most economists, almost all of them, believe in what we call the law of demand. The law of demand is if the price goes up, people buy less of it. The cost goes up, people buy less of it. The supply curve is how much they're willing to supply at a given price. A free market, competitive market, results in the perfect spot, which is, we call it P star and Q star. The price and quantity, they get ground out in the market, and we get what we call equilibrium. But note what that means. What equilibrium means is, at that point, supply equals demand. There's no excess supply, there's no excess demand. And you let the prices allocate where those resources should go. That's lecture number one. Lecture number two, incentives. You guys know lap children on planes. So it turns out, if your kid is 2 and under, they can ride on your lap. Well, it turns out flight attendants and the FAA believe that it turns out that a couple kids, one kid like flew out of the mom's arms during turbulence. They want to ban lap children. That is, you have to buy your own seat. Okay, so the question is, what's their goal of this program? Well, the goal of the program, prevent injuries to children on planes. That's not a very good goal. Why? Suppose you make that kid buy their own seat. Suppose it's $600. A lot of people will say, whoa, I'm not spending an extra $600 for that kid. We'll drive. Driving is way more dangerous than flying. So what would happen is the number of children killed would go up incredibly a lot. So if the goal is children's safety, make lap children up to age 18. And have skinny kids. Death in cars, 750 times greater per mile than flying. Minimum wages. California just went up $20 an hour for fast food workers. What does economics have to say about that? Guess what? Our favorite diagram. But now instead of prices, we have the price of labor, which is wages. The demand curve is the demand for hiring workers by firms. The supply curve is people willing to work at that wage. This is the equilibrium that the market would tell us. Note, again, the supply equals demand. There's no excess supply of workers. That is, there's no unemployment. Somebody thinks that W star is too low. And therefore what they say is, let's raise it. Let's raise it to W under bar. No wages can be under that. What happens? What happens is the demand for workers at that wage goes down. Why? There's some workers who aren't producing $20 an hour. They're only producing $15 an hour worth of product. You're not going to pay them $20. They let them go. More people want to work at that wage, obviously. What we've done, miraculously, is creative unemployment. We created it ourselves. Secondly, fewer people are now working. Right? So now we've done this bad thing. We've told these people who aren't so productive that we're working at W star, you got to go home. We can't employ you. We've now created unemployment. We did not give them a chance to work at their job, get better, learn stuff. You say, does it really happen? Come on, man. You economists, you just have all these theories. That's Amanda. Amanda makes coffee. She's good at it. She does latte art. She doesn't get sick. She doesn't need overtime. She can work 24 hours. No human interaction. I would spill this if I was picking it up. She delivers it. Welcome to your $20 an hour minimum wage future. I'm not saying it's bad. Solution? Get rid of minimum wages. Just get rid of them. Replace it with what? There are some people out there who we want to help. There's something called earned income tax credit. I'm already over my time, so I can't talk about that. But that's not what I came to talk about either. I came to talk about rent control. Gene mentioned it. Obviously, high prices call for rent stabilization. Who benefits? People get to live in them, like Mia Farrow and Ed Koch. The costs are plenty. Rent control has in certain Western countries constituted maybe the worst example of poor planning by governments lacking courage and vision. This is by Gunnar Myrdal, who won the Nobel Prize. He developed a Swedish socialist system. That's how much he hated rent control. Another same idea. In many cases, rent control appears to be the most efficient technique presently known to destroy a city, except for bombing. By the way, I'm going to have these slides on my website, so you can just get them and look at these links. That book I just showed you, every chapter starts with a picture like this. And the question is, bomb damage or rent control? And you have to guess whether it's the Bronx or London, where it's bombed. Remember, supply and demand? Now, instead of prices, we have rents. This is the demand for renting an apartment. This is the supply of apartments. Somebody thinks that the equilibrium market rent is too high. People shouldn't pay that rent. Let's make sure that people pay a lower rent. And by the way, this includes affordable housing components, 20% inclusionary, all that kind of stuff. It's a tax on developers and landlords. So now let's have the rent here. What does that do? Well, we're no longer at this point. There's only this many apartments now because that's how many are going to be supplied. We've lost this many apartments. Where did they go? Well, many people say, hey, I'm not renting that apartment. I'll turn it into a condo. I'll sell it. I'll let my kids live in it. I'll live in it. What's happened? We've created a huge shortage of housing. Ourselves, we created it. I'm not going to go through this example. Sweden, very good example, 1940s. Go to this thing, you'll see every place starting in the 1940s that tried rent control, it's a disaster. Every time. Not once in a while, every time. This is San Francisco, 1994. Disaster. What do you need? You need a rent stabilization board. Santa Monica has one. It's $5 million to pay those people. People can do this. Then you have regulations that say, no, you can't turn your stuff into condos. We try to get them to do percent affordable. No. So remember Gene said that we're going to hire this company, BAE, for $194,000? This offer stands right now for 5 minutes. I'll do it for half price. Half price. You know why? I know the answer. Don't work. It's not going to work. You don't need to spend $195,000. Ain't going to work. Trust me. There's another solution. Vouchers. I'm not going there. I'm out of time. St. Paul, Minnesota, horrible. Disaster. Boston, Cambridge, Massachusetts, The Economist, it's a dismal failure. Berlin, dismal failure. St. Paul, value and rent controlled, houses down 12%. They lost $1.6 billion, 4% decline in property tax revenue. How does it happen? Easy to implement. Doesn't take much. Bottom line, Fed's in a bit of a jam. Not going to see a rate cut. Are we heading toward a recession? These are all the recessions going back to the 1800s. If we're not in a recession, we're heading toward a recession, right? I mean, of course we're heading toward a recession. It's ridiculous. One more thing and I'm done. You guys know Salvatore Ferragamo, the fashion house. You know where he started? 1033 State Street, 1914-15. That's where he started.
I was in Santa Barbara and I was experimenting my new discoveries. There was suddenly a period of setback. The American Film Company, with whom I had built up my success, were suddenly heavily taxed by the city of Santa Barbara, and they left for Hollywood, taking with them naturally all the prosperity of the...
What I'm saying is, tax policy can have really, really bad effects. We could have had Ferragamo here. Anyway, thanks very much. Now I'd like to bring out Rick Caruso and Gene Deering coming back. Rick Caruso, by the way, in case many of you only know of the Miramar, has done lots of things. Hey, Rick, welcome. Welcome.
Hello, everybody. Thank you.
Hello again.
Hi, everybody.
Rick, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
So, how was the drive up? Not too bad?
Terrific.
Good.
Pretty drive.
Great. Oh, it's a beautiful drive. Okay, so I'm going to start out with something that's going on recently. That you've got plans to increase some retail space at Miramar,
Right.
Build some extra apartments, and then some workforce housing.
Right.
So, given we're seeing sort of retail employment declining, what are you thinking?
Well, I don't see retail employment declining.
Good.
On our properties. So our properties, the Grove, the Palisades, the retail at Miramar, our attendance is up double digit. The sales per square foot is up about in the low double digits. Our demand for retail is at its highest it's ever been in terms of space. We run 100% occupied on our properties. So I think good retail is thriving and doing incredibly well and creating a lot of good jobs. So we're very bullish on it. But you have to have the right retail, you know.
Agreed. So now I want to go back in history a little bit with the Miramar.
Okay.
It languished for a long time, as you know.
Yep.
Even when you got it, it took a while. You persevered. So what obstacles were there? How did you pull it off?
You know, listen, what we try to do as a company is find really great communities, and embedded in that community are really incredible pieces of real estate that we can develop and have an experience for the community and others coming in. You can't help but walk on that property, even when it was at its lowest point, right? Everybody remembers the abandoned bungalows and the weeds and the rats and all the issues that were going on there. You're on one of the most beautiful beaches in the world. You look back and see the mountains. You're in one of the greatest communities in the world. And I want to be in a place that there's high barriers to entry. I want to be in a place that if I build something, I create value. And quite frankly, it's tough to compete with because it's tough to build the same thing down the road. And so, yeah, it was a long process, but well worth it. And the community for us has been incredibly supportive. It's now the #1 Rosewood in the world in terms of its volume. It's the #1 in ADR in terms of its room rates. And we just got our 3rd Forbes 5-star, and there's only 15 hotels in the world like that. So I got a great team. And if I could just say, I'm not trying to give you a commercial, but most importantly, I'm proud of my team because of the community events. It's open to the public. You can walk on that property. You don't have to rent a room. You can enjoy the lawn. You can enjoy a cup of coffee. You can walk down to the beach. And all the community events we do, you know, I'm just thrilled by how involved we are.
That's good. No, it's great. We all appreciate it. I go there all the time.
I'll send you a bill.
I guess you can.
No, we want you there.
Paseo Nuevo.
Yes, sir.
So you were involved with that for a little bit. I think you were managing a bit of it, and then what happened?
So we wanted to be involved on State Street, wanted to own property on State Street. At the time, State Street was really exploding. Remember that period of time? So that was probably, 10, 14, 15 years ago, something like that. Yeah. And it was an asset that was controlled by J.P. Morgan. J.P. Morgan reached out to us, and so we structured a deal where we had an option to buy it, but we had an opening period where we could manage it so we could understand it before we exercised our option. And we decided, given a whole bunch of circumstances, not to exercise our option on it, which I was disappointed, but in hindsight was the right thing to do.
Yeah. So this new company, Alliance Bernstein Georgetown Company, I don't know if you've heard of them, but
I don't know.
I mean, in this environment, so they're planning to build today on that environment, in this environment. I mean, it seems expensive to build today. Are they able to pull it off, do you think? I mean...
I don't know what their project is. I don't know what their economics are.
What would you do? What would you do, Paseo Nuevo? You own it? In fact, we'll give you the whole goddamn street. Because what?
I'll take it. Where do I sign?
What would you do?
Where do I sign?
Where's my permits?
Okay.
I have permits here.
Listen, State Street is one of the all-time great streets in the world. You got some of the greatest architecture. You're adjacent to the Pacific Ocean. You're in a beautiful community. How can State Street not be great? It should be great. And so the question is, are there policies and practices in place that are preventing it from being a really magical experience for visitors and residents? I mean, that's what it has to be about. We're in the business, if you ask anybody in our company, what business are you in? We're not in the development business. We're not in the retail business. We're not in the hotel, hospitality business, or the apartment business. We are in the business of enriching lives. Sounds corny, but when you describe and define yourself as that, it gives you permission to do things that your competitors won't even think about doing. And I'll just give you an example, then I'll be quiet. If you go to the Grove, if you've been to the Grove, if we were just shopping centers developers, we would have never built a trolley that goes nowhere. But because we want to enrich the lives of our guests, and especially for the moms with the children, and give them something to do and have enjoyment, we build a trolley that goes nowhere, and it's full every day. And I think that's the way that we have to approach State Street, is look at it and say, how can we envision this street to enrich the lives of the guests and the residents? That's how we approach every one of our projects.
No, that's right. Well, Gene can tell you some of the problems that
Yeah,
that
we
are
were talking backstage.
Yeah, that are facing us, and you know they're not insurmountable. These are things that can be solved. We were talking once to a city council member, and they were like, you know, what can we do? Give me a list of things we can do to help you do this. And the real estate people in that room said, we're not going to give you a laundry list. We want one thing: guaranteed permitting in 1 year. Just guarantee we'll get permitted in 1 year. You'll have more people applying than ever. You know, it's random. Sometimes it takes 4 years to get through a process. Super expensive. And Gene just showed how costly it is to wait 8 months, for example. You could imagine waiting years.
Well, it just means you're not going to start the project. If you think that's a possibility, why would you invest your time and money and sign the personal guarantee?
Yeah. So I didn't get to show Rick's other properties, but like the Grove, like I said, I'm actually there a lot because
Thank you.
I spent a lot of time in LA. Take grandkids there to see the dancing waters, we call them, and you know, walk around. They're on the trolley. Is that really for mostly locals, would you say? Or like Glendale's, the stuff you did at the Americana, that Glendale thing is amazing. That transformed that whole area. It's not a tourist place. You know, it became amazing. So what's your thinking when you're like trying to go into these transformative projects like this?
Well, again, it's to create, we never approach it by saying we're going to build retail or we're going to build whatever. We approach it by saying, how can we build something that people can come to, transport them to a better place in time, and that they have joy when they're there. We know if we do that, people will stay longer. We want dwell time. Shopping centers, by definition, were always designed to limit the amount of time you're on the property because developers wanted the parking lot to turn. If the parking lot turned quickly, you'd build less parking, it would reduce your cost. We had an opposite approach some 30 years ago. We want people to stay longer. We'll build more parking. We'll actually make the parking stall wider so it's easier to park. We want to reduce the friction that people go through to come to our properties. So it's all about what makes sense in that community in terms of scale and product, how to make it livable, walkable. You know, what are people doing on the property nowadays more than ever? Having it safe, especially in Los Angeles. You know, our attendance at the Grove is up 16% this year, off a very, very high number. We have more people going to the Grove than Disneyland, so that's a big number.
Wow.
And they're coming there in large part because it feels safe. And you can walk around and relax and not worry about things. So, again, we have a very fun, unique approach about how we do things, but I have an amazing team that, you know, frankly dreams big and thinks big. And the Miramar, you know, is a good example. That, if you remember it, that site, my father was alive at the time when I bought that site. I had never built a hotel in my life. And my dad was my best friend, and he literally drove to my house when he heard I bought it and said, "What the hell are you thinking? You've never built a hotel, and you got a train running through the middle of it." Right? And I said, "Pop, we'll figure it out." And we have a rule in the company also. Every piece of property has some kind of issue. You can either isolate the issue or celebrate the issue. Can't isolate a train. So we had to figure out how to celebrate it. But if you remember, that site really dropped off quickly. It had a road cutting in the middle of it. You know, there was just a lot of crazy stuff about it. But the team had this great vision to build this beautiful home, the Manor House. And that was the story behind it, that this was a home that was built back in the 30s or the 40s, like many of the great homes in Montecito, and we're going to welcome you home. And it had to feel like it used to be lived in by a family, and there was a story behind it. And that inspired using Paul Williams as the inspiration, as the architect who built many of the great homes in Southern California. So anyway, we get to dream big.
More than Disneyland? You lost me at Disneyland's pretty busy.
Yeah, it's pretty busy. Yeah, we get close to 18, 19 million people at the Grove.
Wow.
And we're getting close to that at the Americana.
Really? That's incredible.
Yeah, I think Americana is going to eclipse the Grove, the trajectory it's on.
So Gene turns out is now a GPT expert. So he asked ChatGPT, what are 10 good questions to ask Rick Caruso on stage at an economics event that recognize his ability to complete transformative developments with respect to what Santa Barbara can do to revitalize downtown Santa Barbara? Bulldozer. What? No. So one of them is, which I really like, your developments often emphasize placemaking and community engagement. So how do you plan to involve the local community when you're going into a project, like say in Glendale or a place like that? How do you engage the community and talk about what you're trying to do?
Great question. So we take over theaters like this, and I stand and I open it up saying, we have an idea to build something here. Tell me what you'd like and tell me what you don't like. And when we did the Palisades, we took over the auditorium at Pali High. I think it was about 6 different nights. We had thousands of people come in.
I'll bet.
And we listened and we took notes. And then we put some pictures and drawings up and we came back. And it's all iterative. We were in living rooms, we're in business halls, we're meeting everybody. In order to be a good developer, you have to listen. And we never presume we know more than the local community. We know that the local community has a better feel of what belongs there, what works there than we do. And so we spend a lot of time listening, and then we draw to that, and we just keep making it iterative until basically it's a project that the community wants. And, for everybody here, I think how many people here are in real estate? Quite a few.
Yeah.
Okay. So most of you probably know what an EIR is, right? We built the Grove without an EIR. We built the Palisades Village 5 years ago without an EIR on a mitigated negative deck. That's in a community that was very sort of anti-development. But we did it because we got so much community support. They were pushing the city and the council office to approve it, and it was a project that fit scale and size with the neighborhood. And I think it's a great formula. It's the formula that we use to build the Miramar, listening to the community, and we're thrilled that we had the support.
And you do that all in-house.
We do it all in-house.
All in-house.
Right.
So, I think we just spent $850,000 on a consultant to tell us what to do with State Street.
I'm happy to spend some time helping.
That would be great.
Yeah. I don't know if but I don't want to presume I've got the answers. But if you wanted to get a team of our people together, who I think are brilliant, and it's not me. We have great designers, thinkers, architects in a room, and let's bounce off ideas, and we'll host you at the Miramar, and let's go do it, because the better State. The better State Street does, the better everybody does. Absolutely.
And like I was asking earlier, the Glendale thing was really for locals. To give that community what they want, right? Here we have a blend of locals, tourists, and that's a fine line to walk, right? We don't want to be a tourist town. We want our town to be our town.
Right.
That tourists would love to come to because it's such a wonderful place.
Right.
So how do you strike that balance?
Well, I think it depends on what you're building, right? And how you market it. You want to have tourism dollars come into any city because they're important dollars to have to support your hotels, to support your retail, to support your restaurants, and to support growth. But I think it's how you market it and what uses that you have. The Grove has about 20% are tourists, at the Grove, so the majority is local. Palisades Village, I would say probably 90%. I think, and Philip is here, he knows better, who runs our hospitality across the board. I think Miramar is probably 80 to 90% sort of from the region, right? It's growing. More people are flying in to it, which is, I think, a healthy thing. But what's interesting, on the retail sales coming out of the stores there, 50% are local and 50% are guests.
Okay.
And I think that's a great mix.
Yeah, no, I agree.
Yeah.
I agree. So you're doing the workforce housing there.
Yeah.
Super important, obviously, in a place like Santa Barbara, where it's very expensive to live. It's kind of hard to live far away here. It's a lot of driving. So what was your reasoning to decide to put some workforce housing in? And I think it's a great idea, by the way. I think it's a wonderful, wonderful concept.
Thanks. I am really bullish on workforce housing. I think we need workforce housing throughout the state, and I don't want to preach about that if I don't lean in and start doing it myself. And we built the Miramar, had 4 units that are dedicated to our workers. So we did that many years ago, but we've been subsidizing many of our workers' rents locally, because the #1 rule in our company is the health and welfare and happiness of our employees. And we want, and the other rule in the company is families always first. So we want people to work hard, but then get home quickly and spend quality time with their families. If somebody has to drive an hour and a half or 2 hours to home and to work, it's difficult to manage that. And so we've been underwriting and supporting many people to live closer. And our team and I just said, let's build it here. We'll be on property. So we put together a project. There's a great state law that encourages the affordable housing. So all of our workforce housing is affordable housing. It's for the people that need it the most, that work at the Miramar. And we're taking no federal, state, or local funding for it. We're doing it privately.
Right.
And the jewel in this that makes it work is, since we have demand for the retail, we can build the retail, and that basically subsidizes the workforce housing. So financially, it's just a really wonderful model. And I would encourage all the business owners up in Santa Barbara County to lean in and do some share of workforce affordable housing, because we need it in the region and the state.
No, that's great. I agree.
Thanks.
I mean, I think that's where Gene and I were trying to talk about, the rules that confront us in terms of affordable housing, having a developer come in and then tell them, we're going to basically tax you. You need 20%, below market rents, those kind of things. In tough times like this, it just doesn't pencil out. And I think if firms can take it among, I mean, you're obviously aware that, being able to do that, you reduce worker turnover, you get better workers, all those kind of things. They're happier, the better culture, So I think those are all things that we benefit from, so.
But I also think, listen, and I was listening to you, and I want to get a copy of your slides, and you were making some great points. I think government has to incentivize private enterprise, for example, to build workforce housing, affordable housing, low-income housing, and market rate housing. We need housing at all levels, right?
Yep.
And so then the question is, how do they incentivize somebody in the right way? And requiring it, I think, is fine, but at the same token, then give an incentive, give a bonus density, give some other things that come along with that help the developer balance out the cost of doing it. Because I think developers generally want to do the right thing, but they're also investing private capital. We're fortunate. I don't have any outside investors or partners, so I don't have a pension fund or somebody saying those numbers don't work. So we always want the numbers to work, but we're looking at long term on everything that we do. And I think most developers want to do the right thing. So the city should come up with ideas to create incentives if it's going to be coupled with a requirement.
Right.
And then it can work. I mean, back in the day when I practiced law, I built my law practice around tax credits, and if you wanted windmills built, wind turbines, there was a tax credit for it. And, the city can do some kind of tax credit benefit on sales taxes or whatnot. There's a lot of things A lot of levers I think the city could pull that could help drive sort of the bigger community benefits that the community needs.
No, it is community benefits, that's
Yeah.
for sure, that's for sure. I mean, I'm an advocate of vouchers, like Section 8 kind of things, giving vouchers
Yeah.
to make sure that the developer gets the market rent. I mean, then they have incentives to build, to maintain the apartments, to keep them going, you know. So, and I think there's ways to do that. I mean, we do a pretty good job at Section 8. I think there's a little bit too many regulations around Section 8.
There's too many regulations on everything.
Well, for sure, for sure.
That's just the nature of the state of California.
Yeah, well, we know. So, you know, sort of back to State Street. I mean, the controversy we have today is: do we keep it close to cars, or do we turn it into what they call a promenade, something?
I'm going to probably step in something here, aren't I?
No, I mean, it's a tough thing. I mean, Gene said, you know, he's kind of for some blocks bring the cars back, maybe just have it one way, have some parking, you know, make it easy to get downtown. They're thinking about raising parking rates. You know, these are all things that are going to inhibit people from coming downtown, not encourage them. You know, even like in Beverly Hills, they have 2 hours free parking. You know, so, you know, it's kind of nice to go down there and make it easy. And so I just think that, you know, for many places, you know, I think what we wanted to happen was make a decision. Just tell us. We have these parklets. If you told us that they're going to be forever, we could make better parklets. We could make nicer ones. If it's not going to be. So I just think, you know, some kind of, you know, transparent, real decision making is going to be important, you know, for Santa Barbara. To me, you know, a group came to me and said, can you do an economic study on closing the State Street versus keeping it open to cars? I'm like, what answer do you want? Right? Because there's places out there where they close it down, it's doing well, some are doing bad, right? The solution is not whether or not to close the street to cars or not. It's really to get more people living downtown, getting traffic to come downtown in terms of people, and I don't really care how you do that.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is, so let's take the Grove, again, as the model of the Americana brand. We designed what looks very much like a street. Dimensionally, it's actually a street. That's why there's a crown in it. We actually went around the country, and we do crazy things like we measure the height of the curb. We measure the rhythm of the trees, where a lamppost sits versus a tree, because we want it to feel real. Actually, the first landscape architect for the Grove quit because he said, I'm not going to build a shopping center with curbs. People will trip. I said, well, people walk around streets all day long and they don't trip. So goodbye. But I would say this, it's all about relative scale. This is what we spent a bunch of time on. Closing the street isn't really the question. The question is the scale from building face to building face the right scale that a pedestrian feels like it's the right place to be? We have all gone to places where it's so large you feel overwhelmed by it, and we've all been in places that are too small that you feel claustrophobic, right? So the scale does matter. And I would say, just off the top of my head, the scale of State Street is such very difficult to become a pedestrian walkway and have that pedestrian walkway feel vibrant. One, because of the amount of traffic you're going to need. Nobody wants to feel alone. It's like if you go into a mall and you can hear the escalator, you know you're in the wrong place, right? You want out. And that's where you've got to be careful. So what I would say is you may want to widen the sidewalks. You may want to create little pockets where people have a park that they can retreat to and you can program it and do things. My sense is, and it's subject to studying it, I would bring the cars back, I would get the traffic, I would make it easy to park, I would make it as frictionless as possible, and then I would make it really great for the pedestrians on the sidewalks and have restaurants and cafes and activative retail that people want to get up and show up here. And that's the direction I would have. But that dimension at the Grove, if anybody's been to King Street in South Carolina, the Grove is patterned after the dimension of that street from building face to building face. And that's an operating street. But at the Grove, we widened the sidewalks and we narrowed down the actual street just to be compliant with fire codes.
Yeah, no, that's great. I mean, I think that's the right view. I mean, you know, one of the problems we also have is our retail storefronts are very deep.
That's what I'm saying.
They're very deep.
It's tough.
It's tough to rent those out. Well, Gene knows. I mean,
It's tougher to rent them out if the person you want to make a sale is 150 feet from it, right? So if they're walking down the middle of the street, they're not going to gravitate. People, there's a logical distance that people will go before they say, I'm not going to take the time to go there. And so you just got to, get a, you know, we've worked with some really great planners that we've learned a lot from.
okay. I mean, you've built apartments, you built condos.
We built apartments. We did build condos. We'd never do it again.
Oh,
Only because I don't like selling anything. I've never sold anything we built. And the company, I want to be dynastic. And, you know, so we build apartments because we like owning things and renting it and creating an experience within our apartment communities.
so do you think, I mean, the talk right now is, you know, we want sort of mixed use downtown.
Mixed use is
residential,
great.
retail. So that's something you would,
Yeah, mixed
gotta
use
go
is
for that,
great.
right?
And the economics of mixed use are terrific. You know, how you can allocate expenses between your retail and your residential. And you look at Americana, like you
Right.
talked about, you know, that's the top of the market, that residential. People love living in that environment. We run it more like a hotel. You have a concierge, you have room service, you got all these services that we provide you, and you're living in this fun, safe environment.
Yeah.
And I think you could duplicate that up and down this street, and then it would really have a vibrancy to it.
No, I agree. That would be great. We just have a couple of minutes left, but do you have some questions for us?
No, where do I sign up?
Right.
No, I'm not. Listen, I'm grateful to this community. I really am, because we took a big chance on the Miramar, but more importantly, the community took a big chance on me because I had never built a hotel. And, you know, that place is magical because the community has embraced it. And so if there's more things that we can do to give back to this community, whether it's within the city or just generally in the county, and to be helpful, we want to do it because, first of all, our family spends a lot of time up here. We love it up here, and this is an important business for us. So we're just very grateful. Okay.
Well, Rick, just want to say thanks very much, Rick. Really
Thanks for
appreciate
having
it.
me.
We'll see you next week on State Street. We'll
I'm
be
ready.
okay. And really, thanks for coming. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.